Video game hype. What does it mean to you? To me, it often symbolizes desperation and is something to be extremely cautious of these days in gaming. It's almost laughable how often a new release will have millions pumped into marketing and hype to only underdeliver on a plethora of aspects it had originally promised. Sure, months or even years down the road they may fix the game and make it into what it was promised on launch, but honestly, this is unacceptable and what makes me so angry at the state of gaming in 2023 going into 24. All I see is pile of shit after pile of shit, with maybe a handful of games breaking through to breathe some semblance of hope back into me, giving me a sign that there are still companies out there wanting to make a good video game. One of the more disheartening things to see is a company have incredible breakout success on one title to only fall into the conformity or peer pressure and rush into their next big game. The one company that always comes to mind when I think about this topic is CD Projekt Red. This studio had us, or at least me, by the balls back in 2015 with the release of the third installment of their Witcher series, The Wild Hunt. This game had plenty of hype and delivered substantially upon release, then continued to do so with the following DLC later in the year with Hearts of Stone, and again in 2016 with Blood and Wine, together bringing damn near an entire other game's worth of content. This is what games should strive to be, and this is why I say there is no better time to play The Witcher 3. Now, back when Witcher 3 first came out, I was utterly glued to my couch for days on end, hacking and slashing my way through Velen, Skellige, and everywhere in between. I hadn't been this enthralled with the video game since back in 2011. Every day I was stuck going to work, I would spend most of my time thinking of this game instead of the tasks I was actually getting paid to do. Definitely not my proudest moment, but that's how captivating this game can be. And the keywords I'm using here are can be. I'd like to start this video by saying that the main questline on its face is fairly bland. The only reason I say this is because the majority of my playtime spent gathering up footage was focused on solely completing just this, and this alone. However, this wasn't the case my first time playing around 8 years ago, and why I still think this game is a masterpiece. It was never the intention for you to rush through the game with the goal of exclusively playing the main series of quests, and honestly, how often do you do that in an open world RPG anyway? And if you said you do, you're lying. I think it's absolutely encouraged to let your ADD run wild in this game and allow yourself to break away from the monotony of detective work and running around completing tasks for people only for a nugget of their withheld information. I don't want to get too much into the details of the story in this video because I feel like you should experience it for yourself, especially if it's your first time playing it. The game's quests are broken up into 3 categories: main, secondary, and Witcher contracts, all having suggested levels attached to them. As I played through the main quests, I was feeling some type of way because almost none of it makes you feel like the Master Witcher Geralt is supposed to be. As I just stated, it's really only comprised of being someone's errand boy, so you can learn a little bit of information about where your pseudo-daughter Ciri is. There's a few times throughout you'll be placed in a position of taking down a powerful monster that's terrorizing an entire town, but it's fairly rare when blazing through this set of quests only. That's where the notice boards come into play. These notice boards will often have the secondary quests and Witcher contracts posted on them, and where much of the action is to be had. Mixing a few of these in when you're feeling bored into the story, and you'll have an amazing time with this game. I'd like to break up this video into 3 parts: the good, the bad, and the take it or leave it. And I want to start with the negative to get those out of the way so we can finish on a positive note, feeling good about getting back into or even starting this game. Some of these are minor and maybe borderline nitpicky, but I wanted to include them because they stood out to me in this particular playthrough. I'd like to begin with Roach. Roach is a pretty controversial topic when talking about The Witcher 3, and it gets brought up every time for good reason. He's positively ass. He's clunky to control, his spawns are shit, and overall I'd rather just run or fast travel. At the risk of beating this dead horse, I'll just touch on one aspect of riding him that's supposed to make it easier to manage, but oftentimes being more of a nuisance more than anything. That being the auto-pathing. The idea behind it is great in theory, but it's missing some of the things that can make it much, much better. Roach will typically never follow the GPS, and most times will miss the turn you were supposed to take, or even take the wrong path when coming to a fork in the road. It's just not as intuitive as it should have been, leaving much to be desired from this primary mode of travel. Speaking of the GPS though, this thing is pretty whacked. So many times in my latest playthrough, I would be following these dots casually on my way to the next objective, and out of nowhere, it would just change directions, leaving me either to stray from the path I was on, or cut off the path and run through a group of trees. And if you've ever run off the path with Roach, you know that this is literally the least optimal thing you could do. 9 times out of 10, you're going to either A, run into a tree and get stuck, B, Roach is gonna freak the fuck out because he's programmed not to run through certain objects, or C, end up going the wrong way because the GPS rerouted to the way you were going before it decided to pull this shit on you. I know this is a bit of a nitpicky subject, but if you're not familiar with the huge map of this game, this might leave you pretty frustrated from time to time. That is, until you've collected all the fast travel locations. Then you can just hop around and no longer have this issue. Another somewhat small annoyance that came up a couple times was the music. Now, in the general sense, the music in this game is fan-fucking-tastic, but in some instances, it casually bleeds rather loudly into a conversation when entering dialogue, disrupting the immersion for the first few seconds, and can be an overstimulating experience for some.
Now we can greet each other like the god.
Hey, Zoltan. You look good.
Training plenty lately. What with the war on, no Mahakaman meat to be found, but Redanian lagers standing in. You, though, you've withered a bit. Something worried?
As I just said, aside from this, the music is amazing. It was just a noticeable flaw I picked up on from time to time. The last 2 qualms I have with this game are more so related to the consistency of the overarching plot and possible misuse of plot devices. The first being Ciri. There are multiple breaks in Geralt's story to give insight to what happened to Ciri through her eyes. In these instances, you get to take control of Ciri and walk her path to see what she'd been up to. Through these interactions, Ciri ends up getting into a few fights with things such as wild animals, and we get to experience combat through another character. And wow, she's powerful. Now, this to me was kind of shocking. Ciri was a protege of Geralt's and in no way should be this much stronger than he was. I'm not sure if the difficulty just doesn't scale for her parts, but it was just kind of a surprise to see how easy these breakaway parts were compared to when you're in control of Geralt. Now, I understand she has Elder Blood powers and that I can forgive, but the swing of her sword does far more damage to a wolf than Geralt, and it just feels unnatural as Ciri still looks up to Geralt even towards the end when they reconnect. It's really not that big of a deal, but more of just like kind of a plot loophole for no particular reason. The difficulty of her story portions should have matched Geralt's at the very least. And the last and probably weakest gripe I have with this game is the fact that Geralt never has a clue where any of the locations mentioned through dialogue are, but upon arriving knows all the people who reside there. He was always like, where is that? I've never heard of that. Then going there only to act as if he's been there 100 times over. This would make sense had they kept the idea of his amnesia plot device running throughout, but they abandoned that pretty early on, which is backed up by him telling Yennefer that he had his complete memory back every chance he had got. Nothing game breaking, but something I personally felt was a little off. Alright, now we got those out of the way, let's explore what I think are some take it or leave it's in regards to this game. There's just 2 things that inhabit this category, and it's facial expressions and dialogue options. These almost go hand in hand when talking about them, but let's first talk about the facial expressions. For the most part, the motion capture for this game nails it, and the expressions portrayed match up to what emotion is being evoked. However, there's a few times here where it's almost comical how opposite or neutral the emotion on a character's face is in relation to what they're saying. I'm not sure how to describe it, so here's a couple examples from the game.
Now I don't even know if she's alive.
There's an example of the latter. Besides, I've a favor to ask you. So, visit me sometime?
Now, let's talk about the dialogue options. So many times throughout this game did I regret my decision when selecting a specific statement. This is because the words that I had selected were not at all what ended up coming out of Geralt's mouth, and would often come off way more abrasive than expected. It felt like this was the case more often than not, and really soured my experience to a degree since I would accidentally upset the person I was talking with, unknowingly picking the wrong dialogue option. If you're going to give me options to pick from, don't change the words that I pick. It feels as if someone's putting words into my mouth and can confuse the intention of the conversation. Fortunately, these choices you select have fairly low impact on the grand nature of things, but can ruin a romance option if mistakenly chosen the brazen option one too many times. Alright. Enough shitting on this game. It really doesn't deserve it, because deep down the positive aspects of The Witcher 3 highly outweigh the negatives. Let's explore that a bit further, shall we? The moment of truth. What makes this game so special to me and why I find myself absolutely addicted? Well, for starters, it's undoubtedly one of the most gorgeous games I've ever seen. The depth of colors and shading, lighting to shadows, it's hard to believe this game was made in the last gen era. Though it did have a next gen update earlier this year, it only served to improve the already miraculous canvas built back in 2015. Just look at this sunset. So many times would I be going about my quest and have to stop to admire the scenery around me. From the snowy mountains of Skellige to the prairies of Novigrad and the swamps of Velen, every biome had its immense and striking beauty. The level of detail is further expanded when you start to notice the little things CD Projekt Red did to provide uniqueness to Geralt himself. It took me more than 20 hours of gameplay to notice that each weapon type when placed upon his back had its own unique sheath. I was kinda stunned when I noticed, because never would I even think that was something that was necessary. Most RPGs just place the unused weapon into either an invisible inventory or a generic one-size-fits-all sheath. I love when developers put such level of detail into their games that you may not even notice the first few times that you play it, but when you do, it's that much sweeter. Sticking on this level of detail topic, let's talk about when it comes to quality of life. Who hates when a game forces you to follow an NPC that walks slower than a slug covered in salt? I certainly do, and that's another reason to love this game. It understands this. Sure, there are quests that utilize this format, but you can choose whether to race through it or not. The NPC will generally match your speed. Walk, run, or sprint if you'd like, the NPC will do the same. This doesn't come without consequence though. If you do decide to sprint through, you may miss some banter or an interesting side dialogue, but this generally isn't super important stuff. Like I said, it's more or less banter between the two characters, giving you a bit of insight into their relationship by how they communicate with one another. Freedom is what open world RPGs are all about, and limiting players to walking at a grudgingly slow pace to the next destination doesn't feel so free. Thank you CDPR for getting this and allowing us to choose exactly how to approach these scenarios. Freedom can come at a cost at times though, especially when we're talking about combat. If every encounter can be solved in any which way, an overpowered build may just make it too easy. This is another area the game handles extremely well. Combat, while at times can be fairly repetitive and predictable later in the game, doesn't start out this way. If you're playing on easier difficulties, this may not apply as much, but as you move up to hard and especially Death March, combat tactics become just that, tactics. You absolutely will not be able to just fight any which way you want. Okay, maybe humans are an exception, but monsters are a whole nother beast, pun intended. There are bestiaries for each monster and each provide insight to the monster's weaknesses, which, and again, I'm talking about the harder difficulties, is an absolute must. Many people, when talking about this subject, will always remember the first time they fought a werewolf. You think you're doing well until it starts regenerating its health faster than you can deplete it. Refer to the bestiary to find out why and how you can combat this, and the fight becomes more manageable. This type of combat depth really allows this game to shine and present itself as a well thought out piece of art. If I had to describe the combat of this game, it would be akin to a more palatable Souls-like experience, generally referring to fighting the beasts. Souls-like light, if you will. The main difference being that the beast won't all of a sudden develop a brand new move the 5th or 6th time attempting it, much like the Souls games do. Their moveset is pretty static for the most part. And coming off the back of combat, let's talk about alchemy and signs. These two are the puzzle pieces that are used to complete the hardships of fighting beasts in the game. Certain signs can be used to make an enemy weaker or make yourself stronger. One sign that I rarely used to begin with was Quen. I really thought my skills were that good and I would never need it. But then I was talking to my fellow content creator, Devoid. He said that it was one of the most overpowered signs. I thought there was no way that it was that overpowered. I mean, it was just a one-time use shield. I'd rather blast fire out of my hands. That, to me, seemed way stronger. Man, how ignorant I was being. He was absolutely right. Quen is strong. It's basically a get out of jail free card and is oftentimes regenerated by the time you get hit, basically giving you endless shields. After being informed of this, I never went back. But back to the topic at hand. These signs, when used correctly on specific enemies, always resulted in a more favorable outcome. Alchemy, on the other hand, was similar to signs in that when used correctly would net you overall benefit. Alchemy casts a wide net and covers an array of things in this game. Alchemy is used to brew potions, decoctions, oils, and bombs, each having their own specific benefit. I'm not going into detail on every craftable alchemy item because that would take forever, but the one thing to note about this subject is that once it's crafted, you never have to craft it again. This was a relief because you may know my feelings on alchemy, it's a pain in my ass. In The Witcher, once a brute item is crafted then used up, all you have to do is meditate with any sort of alcohol in your inventory to replenish all previously made concoctions. You only have to search for or purchase these ingredients once. Isn't that lovely? Oh, and speaking of lovely, the last thing I wanted to go over with talking about the positives of this game relates back to the beauty of it all. This time from a cinematic perspective. And no, I'm not talking about the cutscenes. Although they're often praised and appealing to the eyes, they've been praised to death on nearly every other video out there. What I focused in on was the detail and finesse of the goddamn finishers. Not only were these gruesome and reminded me of a Mortal Kombat fatality, they're just so fucking satisfying to see. The attention brought to the dismemberment of limbs or heads is just the cherry on top of an already perfect sundae. I love a good finisher, and even more so when it's done at this level. It's just a satisfying end to the slaughter Geralt brings every time someone picks a fight with him. A smaller subsect of these finishers is even seen mid-battle. You could be fighting a group of 3 or 4 people, and mid-fight you'll see a dude get absolutely split in half without the game skipping a beat, so as it doesn't detract from the flow of battle. Like I said, I love finishers, but when they're just that, a finisher. When I think about games like Skyrim and Fallout and there's a slow motion cinematic finisher while in the background a couple of foes wait for you to be done, it just feels a little awkward and unnatural. The Witcher sprinkles in these gruesome fatalities throughout a battle and only slows time to bring attention to it when it's truly the end of the fight. In my opinion, this is pure excellence. And that's the best way I can describe The Witcher 3. Pure excellence. It exceeds so many people's expectations and brought CD Projekt Red's name to the forefront of what games should strive to be. I can't stress enough how much this is a perfect time to play or even replay this game. Like I mentioned, it had a next-gen update earlier this year that brought a wave of graphical upgrades to it, making it even prettier. I didn't even cover the DLC either, which is, from what I heard, damn near a whole nother game's worth of content. I've never played them, but sure as shit going to now because I'm reminded how exhilarating this game is to play. Anyway, I hope y'all enjoyed this video, do all the cool things I'm supposed to remind you to do, and I'll see y'all next time.
Where is he?
Shan't escape me this time.
She'll not abandon you. You humans are so impractical.
Ciri, no! I forbid you! You always were an unruly child. I adored that about you. Now fly!
Vad är då syftet?